Good evening, comadres.
Hi, comadres.
Buenas noches, yeah.
Welcome to our very special post-election Plática. We're going to be talking about some of the things that have been happening over the last week and what we think is going to happen in the near future. We have a really, what, we're missing somebody. Oh, we had somebody a minute ago that's gone now. So we have a really good group of folks here. We have Dr. Martha Rivas, and I'll actually go around and have them introduce themselves. Martha, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I'm a formally trained academic, professor, consultant, activist, peleonera. I'm everywhere.
That's right.
With the focus on, anti-racist. I'm a critical race theorist. So I was one of those that was warned by this current administration that you shouldn't hear me because I speak truth to power. So that's who I am.
That's right. And then we have Norma Chavez Peterson. Welcome.
I'm from San Diego. I'm an organizer at heart. I've been doing community work since I was a teenager. I was politicized by Prop 187. Actually, before that, I was in middle school when I got politicized. And so I've been engaged in community organizing, social justice, pretty much my entire life. And now I lead the ACLU of San Diego and Imperial Counties, the first Chicana to run an ACLU, a local affiliate. And I'm here, I'll just say, I'm here on my own personal comadre time. So I'm here to speak my mind about how I'm feeling about the election. So I'm not here representing the organization, but my own perspective. So gracias for having me.
Thank you for being here. And then we have our very own comadre, Sacramento, representing Sacramento, Lexi Lopez. Tell us who you are.
Hey, everyone.
Oh, Lexi's traveling, so she might be dipping in and out.
Technical difficulties right now. So I apologize. So I'm not sure if you guys can hear me, but I work in education advocacy in Sacramento. I have been very passionate about education equity basically my entire life, working with my mom, who is an English learner teacher in Central Valley. And she just continues to even throughout this pandemic. And inspired by all of these other comadres, and yeah.
All right. And then you guys all know and love Alma. So Alma.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alma Marquez. I'm from LA, originally from HP, Huntington Park. But I claim it all day, every day. And so yesterday, actually this morning, it feels like yesterday, but this morning we decided let's talk about the election. It's such an important historical moment for us. And we said we should get our comadres from different parts of the state together to talk about kind of our perspectives, things that are going down, things we're thinking, our hopes, some plans. And so I really wanted to thank all of you for being on here so that we could talk a little bit more about kind of what we're thinking and also like what our hopes are. I mean, I think most of us here are also moms, but all of us are either tias, cousins, definitely the people in our community, the women in our community are the ones that uplift our community, as you all know. And so we wanted to have a space to be able to talk about, kind of a keep it real crew of the comadres, right? And so I'm excited that we're all here. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. And share it, please. Start a watch party.
Yeah, for sure.
Very rare that we get Latinas talking about Latina perspectives, and it's also very rare to have us from different parts of California, which is the 5th largest economy of the world, not just of the U.S., but of the world. And we're here repping. Marta is in Coachella, Lexi is up in Sacramento, Norma is in San Diego, I'm in LA, Letty is in the Inland Empire. So we're from different parts of California. And hearing our voices is really important. So please share with all your comadres and compadres on Facebook.
Yeah, and as Alma mentioned, yes, I'm representing in an empire in this Batika tonight, and I also want to just share one really quick thing for those of you who may not be aware. We just celebrated La Comadre, just celebrated our 5th anniversary.
Yeah.
So I wanted to mention that we've been around for 5 years. We've been talking, we've been writing, and we've been involved in the conversation, and we're just growing. So thank you so much for supporting us all these years and for keeping up with us and for growing with us. And thank you, Alma, for inventing this platform and holding this space for us so that we can have these kinds of conversations.
I'm so happy that we could do it together. It's been a family effort, and we're going to continue to grow, continue to build it, because Latinas deserve our space. And if we don't become more visible, we're going to be continued to be, pushed into the peripheries and silenced and made invisible. So it's up to us to raise up our voices, even when it's uncomfortable. Because, a lot of the stuff that we talk about and that we advocate for is, it makes people pissed. And, we don't always align with some of our natural allies. And, we make some people mad. And, kind of like from the hood, whatever.
I'm wearing my hoops right now. Let's go.
Hey, I'm wearing my Coyotaco earring, so I'm ready.
Okay. Yes, girl.
Yeah, I'm ready. So, okay. So let's just get right into it. We had an election and we have a new president and vice president. And let's talk about the vice president.
Yes.
Because what it means historically, I mean, even if you're not a fan, even if you're not a Democrat or, whatever you are, it is still a historic event that we now have a female as vice president. This is the first time in the history of the United States that we have a woman that's going to serve, and bonus points because she's a woman of color. What do you guys think?
A daughter of immigrants.
Right?
Like, that's so big, right?
Absolutely.
So what do you guys think that means? What do you see happening? What do you think is gonna tell it? Let's talk. Spill some tea.
And the first biracial vice president.
Yes.
I didn't quite hear what she said. I think, did she say
biracial vice president?
Perfect. Yeah, I think, for some of us, we celebrate that to the very last, to the victory speech, right? When she was able to even just say black.
Yeah, so Kamala Harris.
Brown girl, black girl. I mean, to that was like, finally, it's at the podium. She's standing there wearing white. And, for those of us who may not know the significance of the suffrage and women wearing all white is constantly fighting for our right to be here, period. And so I think, for me, it's powerful, right? I mean, I'm a mother of two young chicanitas, 10 and 8. And for them to be able to articulate, there's a brown vice president in this country. I mean, that itself is powerful for my children to even say. Because they would say, yeah, it's Joe Biden. But if something were to happen, we have her. Like, it's for them, it's like their corazón está con ella. And I think that's the most powerful thing that I don't think I envision happening now. Just because the history of this country. But I think it also got muddled a little bit. So I don't want it to get muddled. I want us to just focus on that historic movement of having her be our vice president. It's exciting.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah. I have 3 daughters, 2 older girls that are 27, 24, and then the little one that Alma knows, Amaya, who peeped in earlier, who's 12 years old, who's biracial. She's Blaxican, right? Mm-hmm. She's a Black and Chicana. And we had the opportunity to meet now Vice President-elect Kamala Harris. Last December, we were invited. And so we have a picture with her. So one, to see my daughter, who is half Black herself, who's half Black, half Mexican, and just the fact, like Marta said, she sees herself represented in a very powerful office, right? The first vice president. I was loving, the memes and the videos that were going viral of, for the history of this country, it's been all white males.
Yep.
And to have the first vice president that's a female and a Black woman, a daughter of immigrants, it's historic, but it's powerful in terms of, our little girls seeing themselves reflected in her and knowing that, it's possible. It's possible to make change and to lead in powerful ways. So yeah, it's been exciting in this household.
Mm-hmm.
It's so awesome.
I think, but it's also about, I also didn't want it to be, because she's gotten like all these little clips of her saying, it's strong work, it's believing in yourself, it's having people who support you, leading you all the way to the top, and here she is. And I also want to be mindful that while we celebrate that narrative and that speech, it's also about, at the same time, breaking a glass ceiling, right? It's at the same time talking about the history of this country, why women wouldn't be able to be, why wouldn't it be considered? Because of patriarchy, because of misogyny. And for us to be able to be comfortable saying those terms, because she doesn't say it in her wording, but we need to complement it. It's like, yes, you need to have people to support you. Yes, you have to believe in yourself, because the system was created not for you to believe in yourself, for you not to be able to make it through. You know what I'm saying? So we also have to parallel that narrative to systemic, to how this country was created, why it is historic. It's not just because she's a Black woman, a daughter of immigrants. Yes, that's all of that too. But it's also because we're talking about the systemic, essentially a pathway, right? That she was able to get through and saying, okay, here I am. I'm your vice president. And so I know some of us have seen those pictures of there's like all the smaller pictures, and then she's standing with her Black power suit. I mean, that itself, that's it.
Yeah.
But it's also for us to recognize. And again, we're in that process right now. I feel like we're in that process where people are asking, well, what institutional barriers? What systemic oppression? And some of us have felt it generationally, but now we're speaking directly to it. And I think that's the power of all of this.
Yeah.
So we're able to talk about that.
I think for me, some of you might know this, but when she ran for Attorney General, so she's from the Bay Area, right? Mm-hmm. And so when she ran for Attorney General, a very good friend of mine, Alita Garcia, was working on her campaign, and Alita is a champion and leads, like, I celebrate you because you were the visionary who introduced Kamala to a lot of us in California. And especially in Southern California, because she was very well known in San Francisco, but wasn't so well known in different parts of the state. And Alita helped open those doors so people would know her. And that's how I met her. And so Alita introduced us. I really just loved her story. I loved her energy. And so we started Latinos for Kamala for Attorney General 11 years ago. And the only reason why I know it's been 11 years is because my Facebook memories, especially now because I can't go anywhere in this pandemic, I'm like reliving my Facebook memories all day, every day. And so a lot of the stuff has been popping up from this time 11 years ago. And we started Latinos for Kamala, and it was the beginning of a conversation. And several of us have been doing a lot of Black-brown work for many years. And so it was, the continued conversation of how do Latinas show up for Black leadership? How do we make sure that that we support Black women, that we support leaders of color, and specifically, how do we support other women? And so seeing, me Getsley in those pictures, my baby, who will be joining us shortly, seeing me Getsley in those pictures at 10 years old, and now she's a full-on grown, 21-year-old, it's just so beautiful to know that, like, she got that image as a little girl, and now as a woman, she actually got to vote for her. And that was just so incredible, and being able to see that, because those are my dreams for my baby. You know, I want my baby, and have always wanted my daughter, to see herself reflected in leaders. And that's why I always rock for women. And because I want her to see herself as a potential leader. And I've always wanted that for her. And so it's just been so beautiful to see that happen. And for me, it was like this incredibly special moment of uplifting Black women. I loved the fact that my Black women friends and Black women across the nation, and really across the world, because everybody in the world was watching with us, you know, that that Black women could celebrate something so beautiful, especially because, you know, they've had to carry some very heavy crosses in our country. And the fact that they could celebrate that, like, I was thinking about my girlfriends. I have several friends who went to college and who are part of the Black sororities. They're the AKAs. That was my actually first sorority that I learned about, because as a Chicana, I never knew about that. Like, you know, Chicana from the hood, who, it wasn't until I went to work and met with some of these women, right? So Kamala is an AKA, which is this, you know, sorority. And I was celebrating for them because that's their sister, that's their homegirl. And for her to be able to reach that level, it's just a beautiful thing, man. And I celebrate that all day, every day. And I'm very excited for many reasons, you know, for my Black sisters, for my daughter, for my goddaughter who was at that event, you know, 11 years ago. And I celebrate for your daughters who are like, now that's going to change what they see as possible for real, as little, you know, as little people. So it's just beautiful.
I also think it's really fabulous, the irony of how she's, you know, Auntie Kamala. And in the Indian tradition and culture, you know, women could never be what she is now. So I think that's, you know, it's also like so many Indian women that are here now in the United States celebrating, you know, that aspect of her as well, which is really great. So where are we going to go from here, guys? Because there's challenges happening. There's all kinds of ugly, divisive rhetoric.
Well, I think
some of our Latino community are confused, or, you know, about what's going to happen with them. So what are we thinking is going to happen with this new administration?
Well, I think I want to go back a little bit before we get to this, because I think it's also part of we also have to be celebrating in not a very simplistic way in terms of saying, you know, Black women, and, you know, it is obviously honoring and all the work that historically, we're talking centuries of the struggle and the leadership that the Black female community has done for this country. But it's also about honoring what she represents, right? So like the Blackness in our Latino community, our Black Latinos, our Afro Latinos. I mean, there's this connection with who she is as the embodiment of who she is. And like Alma said earlier, she's a daughter of immigrants. And so what does that mean, right? And I think the connection for all of us, as we're casted as immigrants, some of us were never immigrants, but we're seen as immigrants. And so I think it really enables us to say, okay, let's take it a step further. Let's really think about all the intersectionalities that she presents, so that we can say that she represents what America is, right? This is who we are. And I think that's one thing that I want us to start honoring, is by talking about all these nuances that is not simplistic. It's so much more complex. And so I think in that complexity, that's when we really start celebrating why it's so important for us to honor her. And surely we'll talk about Biden, because it's also some contradictions there in terms of how we're celebrating another white man in that office. But nonetheless, I think I just want us to just make that statement that there is additional reasons why we have to be able to honor her, and how she is sort of like this umbrella of really encompassing who America is. So anyways, I just wanted to make sure we bring that up as well.
And you know, the reality is that it's not, it's highly possible that during the tenure of this administration that she will become likely the first president as well. It's not that's definitely a possibility.
I mean,
Depending
that's
on
what
how things
when
go.
my daughters say, if something were to happen, she could be our president, mom. It's like that level of like possibilities. And I think rightly so, it could happen.
A heartbeat away.
We'll see what happens. But I think if anything, we're at the Monday post results. And so I think we want to be able to digest all of what that means. But absolutely.
Right. So okay. So do we want to talk about what's going on in some of these states with the Latino vote? And let's not talk about Florida because they're like persona non grata.
Yeah, even before we go there, like one of the things that I was thinking about, when we were shifting the conversation, and something that I've been reflecting on a lot is, yes, we got to celebrate. I mean, I think for many of us, Saturday when, Pennsylvania was called, it was like our energy shifted. It was like, I mean, texts are blowing up and we're still in that moment. I know, at least for me, I still feel, a little numb, and like I actually need to have the space to fully like just, shout, and cry, because literally for the last 4 years, I'm right here in San Diego, right? I'm right on the border. For the last 4 years, we have been under attack, right? Asylum seekers, separation of families. I mean, I'm getting chills, like on and on. We have been in crisis mode, an attack on all of our rights. And at least for me, I'll just speak for myself. I feel like I'm still processing, and like I feel like we need a little bit more time to just even celebrate. But something that, me llegó al corazón, and it's still like something that we need to talk about, is the fact that, about 70 million people voted, for a divisive, hateful, person who is the embodiment that's totally counter to like the values that I cherish, around equality and justice and to opportunity. So there's a lot. And then, we can talk about the Latino vote because, there's family members of mine that voted for him, and many of ours. I think if we go to our own families, and that's the stuff that there's so much work to do in our own communities. Forget about Florida. We know about Florida and about Cubanos and the narrative that was used around, Biden and Harris being socialist as a way to tap into that fear. But the reality is that even here in California, with our own like Chicanos, Mexicanos, etc., there's so much work that we need to do to have real conversations around WTF, like what's up?
Yeah.
Why are our folks voting against their own interests?
Well, I mean, the whole question is, are they able to identify what those interests are and actually name them? I think, and I was sharing this earlier, a lot of the work I've been doing the last 3 years has been to really talk about the historic, history of this country, talking about what is white supremacy, what is racism, what is prejudice, because we're not all racist when we understand the concept of what racism really is, right? And I think part of all of this, why we see the votes be what they are, is because white supremacy ya los agarró, right? I talk about white supremacy as el cucuy, right? If you believe in some of this jargon that's nonsense, that's against our communities, ya te agarró, right? That's white supremacy at its finest. For you to uphold supremacy and racism against your own, you're doing what they wanted you to do. Yeah. And so what it is that, and that's why we talk about why are we not talking about this broadly? Why are we not talking about the history? Is because we're not supposed to, right? They're not going to talk about it in our schools. They're not going to talk about it in our communities because we're not supposed to. And so I think that's ultimately why the results look the way that they do. And so when they said Monday.
During this whole election season, what we found out and what we saw is that there are a lot of Latinos and also and some of the Proud Boys that were, the president gave that message to, are Latino. Right. So they're white supremacists, they're Latino white supremacists. And so, hello people, that's a thing.
Right, but it's also about patriarchy and machismo and misogyny. So like, let's remove race to the side about white and, all of us. let's look about patriarchy and misogyny. So yeah, of course these men are going to be like, yeah, let's grab, rhetoric that this man, produced and sustained. So
Women
yeah,
too.
también ellas metas, excuse my language, but it's just because they fall victim and really indoctrinating themselves, right? The formula they created for this country and for everybody worked because
and we were talking about how it is a form of brainwashing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And we were just talking about that. Vice put out, it's almost like a 2-hour clip just for folks to really understand how cults work and how the psychology of the method works. So this constant repetition, right, and it could be as absurd as just saying, oh, this is true. Oh, this is true. Like he'll have like a Trump and his people would have like this long strand of lies, but then would say, oh, that's true. Oh, well, that's true. Well, that's true. And as like this constant repetitive notions, because that is how our brains function. When you constantly have this repetitive phrase, se te va a quedar allá adentro. And so when you're telling people lies, but this is true, you are brainwashing them. So I would recommend folks to take a look at that video. And I just saw it this weekend, and to me it was like there was this grotesque in my pit because I know exactly what they were doing. And I was very mindful the last, I would say, 3 years. I didn't want to watch anything related to that face and that voice.
Yeah.
And so anyways, I think
for me, everything you're saying is real. And I think that it speaks to several things. One, honestly, I feel like in many ways, the alternative was not a hopeful. I mean, look, Norma and I became homegirls because we organized with Obama. Letty and I became, closer because we organized for Obama. Miquetli became a political activist because she was exposed and started organizing with Obama. And I feel like the energy that we were able to tap into, which was a message of hope and love and strength and power and community, was a very different energy than what we've had since. And I think that, even back then, I mean, I was doing the Latino vote operation here in California, and I was the California Latino vote director. But the reality is that we tapped into hope and love, and that's where we were working from. And unfortunately, like, that's not even part of the conversation. So we can't mobilize people who aren't hopeful. I mean, that's just the reality, right? So like, I think we need to reground, and this is something I'd love to hear Miquetli's thoughts on this too. But I really think that we as Latinas have a responsibility and an opportunity to change this conversation so that it's not just the bullshit that we've been hearing from Donald Trump and his brainwashing and his lies, but like really ground it in the women and ground it in the feminine, that, we have to be thinking about our kids. We have to be thinking about our nieces and nephews. We have to be thinking about what do they need, especially during this really crazy time in history that we're living. We're living in a plague. I mean, like, for real, it's a plague. People call it a pandemic, but I'm like, shit, can we just be real? This is a plague. Like, and so how do we protect our families? How do we protect our people when we know Raza is out there working and working hard, working at the front line? I've quoted the stat before that only 17% of all Latinos in the country can work from home. So that means that all of the other people, 83% of Latino community, has to work out of their home, outside of their home. So I think we've got to change the narrative. I want us to say, yes, it was terrible that we've got 70 million people who supported Trump and or supported the Republican Party, right? Like, maybe that was their pedo, who knows? But the reality is that, like, how do we shift it for our people? How do we talk about it differently? so that our numbers mirror like the ride or die Black folks who've been coming out for the Democrats, even though the Democrats aren't always on point with our shit either. Like, just be real, you know? So anyway, I feel
No, you're right. You're right. It's
But I think it still goes back to the this notion of some of us are privileged enough to be able to understand, like to know the history of a country and be able to call it and name it for what it is, right? So the fact that there's 83% of our gente having to work outside of the home during all of this was structured. It was systematically structured. You know, we don't have slavery, but we have us working out there, right? And so it's like, for us to be able to name it, I think it is part of that. How do we love ourselves enough to be able to call it for what it is?
Yeah.
So it's always rooted in love, and it's always rooted in hope. And I think maybe that's the teacher in me, right? And wanting to be able to teach the history of this country so that we understand, oh shit, now it makes sense why we're looking the way we are. You know, right now I'm an Indio, but the entire Inland Empire, like we talked about, like, well, we're not going to go out to the colleges or universities because it was structured that way, but we're going to go to the factories. And that's where we're dying off early at real young age. And so I think for me, I could just make those large statements, but it's got to go back to, but it was created to be this way, right? Just like the voting results, it was created to be this way because the brainwashing of folks, that was the intent from day one. And so it's like sort of like the walking the fine line of, yes, what are our needs? But then we're coupled to like, this is what we need, but we understand that the society was structured a certain way, so we really have to work harder than anyone else because we are Latina women. So in any study that you see, estamos a mero abajo.
Yeah.
Right. So anyhow,
let's hear from our young people.
Yeah, I think she was voted, but she was ya la miré. She was like ready to say something.
Lexi, what are your thoughts?
I kind of wanted to go back to, like, we have some time right now, and it's really great. I kind of feel like I can take a breath for the first time in 4 years, and I do feel hopeful in a way that I was hopeful 4 years ago when I thought I was going to be president. But taking a step back to all of the people who did vote for Trump, I did just have a conversation with my mom this morning where she was like, one of my students came to me pretty distraught and was like, I'm happy about the election results, but I didn't realize that the world was so racist. Like, I didn't realize that there were so many racist people in the world, and she was like, it made me sad because I know what to tell them because they could see the results. That means people still voted for a man who said all of those things and they had no regard for who they were as students, as their parents are immigrants, and they were very scared about all of the potential possibilities of a Trump presidency for the next 4 years, and all of the people who said it didn't matter to them. That didn't. So it's like, how do we have a conversation where we completely engage? But I do want to have more of those conversations in schools, because I don't think that we have those conversations where we don't learn about those systematic oppression and how our systems work until, we go to college and we learn we learn the hard way. But we should be teaching these things to our students early, and so I need to throw that back out there. And how do we have that conversation? How do we go forward from here? Because those people do exist, not just in those other states, but in California.
Totally.
So how do we kind of have that conversation going?
Yeah, and that's exactly what Dr. Rivas was also talking about.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we definitely have some work to do, and a lot of it to me is really it's a lack of education, but it's also just wanting to be ignorant. I have family members too. I know Nora mentioned it. I have family members too who are educated but are willfully and purposely ignorant and choose to support whatever is against their best interest. And it's really sad to me. And it's not like I can disown them, but
You can.
well, one of them is my mother. So,
They're gonna cause toxicity.
so yeah,
You're like, can't do that.
So yeah, but I mean, it's just, girl. I mean, like that's my dilemma, that that's happening in my family, But and I'm sure it's happening in a lot of families. It's just willful fucking ignorance. Like you don't even want to try to see the truth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to hear from Miketsi, but I would love to have a conversation because I've been curious. I want to ask people. Like, I think we need to have a conversation about, yes, the history and understanding of, white supremacy and systems of systemic inequality. But I also want to have a conversation in our communities and our families about values.
Yes.
Values. What are the values that guide how you live your life? Is empathy one of those values? Is compassion one of those values? Because if they are those values, then why would you support someone like that? You know what I'm saying? So so I want to stop talking because I want to hear from Miketsi, but like, how do we have the conversation in our own community, around like the history and that understanding, which is important and it's fundamental, but also like the conversation about values. I'm putting Miketsi on the spot, but I want to hear from her because she's probably the youngest person here, and I'm totally curious how you're feeling, Miketsi, about what's happening.
Definitely. Hi, everyone. So there's a few different things. I think going back, Martha, to your point around identity, I think it plays a huge role in how I have moved in my adult life. I was raised in a household where I was given a lot of knowledge on the history of our people, of this land, and I didn't really make the connection until I was in college and was really given that curriculum in some Chicano studies courses. And I remember sitting in class one day and just having this feeling of, oh my goodness, I get it. And cannot believe that so many of our people do not have access to this. And that I think we also have to go back to this of like, education is a privilege. And I think that we all recognize that, and having access to this knowledge and education of even being literate, being able to have these skills that we really take for granted on a daily basis. So being able to really come back to the root of and take action to change that. And I think, again, going back, Norma, to your point around values as well, of how do we value these systems that are continuing to oppress us, and how much do we owe to them, and in what ways can we take back our power? So I think there's a lot of different ways that we can do this, and I don't think that voting is the only way. I think it's mobilization. It's being able to have really hard conversations and really being able to see the future. And I think, like, for the first time in the last 4 years, I definitely feel a sense of relief and excitement, but also this feeling of wanting to hold this new administration accountable. There's been years of oppression of our people, and I think not being able to pinpoint a time in history where Latinos have been oppressed in the same way, I think it's difficult to understand how we have been led up until this point. So I think there's a lot of different conversations that we need to be having within our own families, but also with our friends, and have those really uncomfortable conversations that I think we've already been having, but I think it's time to take it to the next level of making the connections of why and how we've been led to this time.
Exactly. Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean,
You did good, Alma.
I'm like, that's my baby.
Like, proud mama.
That's right.
Proud
Well,
mama
absolutely.
right
Proud. Yes. But I think it's also
Wait a minute. We did good.
Yeah,
Yes.
girl, we
Yes.
done good. It was, and
Yes.
y'all definitely contributed to that.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Now,
Mhm.
I just
now
want to
mind
make
you,
one.
her generation seems to be one of the most woke generations that's up and coming for sure. I mean, so
I think I just want to make a statement in terms, because I know that you mentioned that like some of your family members who are formally educated and still supported Trump. And so I just want to make, and because we talked about the importance of learning this history, I also want us to be mindful that just because folks obtain a formal education doesn't mean they're critical thinkers.
no.
And so let's not equate formal education to progressive, let's dismantle the system, because some of these folks hold these degrees to uphold the system. And that's why they voted for Trump. And so I think going back to Kitsy's point is when you start really looking at the history, right? Because Chicana and Chicano studies or ethnic studies as a whole is not just, it's not a multicultural education. It's really to understand the systemic evolutionary processes of this country. And so now you finally see us in history, right? Trying to fight for what we deserve from day one. And so I think that's really what I think Miguel is really holding us accountable to, is like, let's take it to a deeper conversation. Let's have those conversations that Norma is asking us to have with our family members of what values, what morals, but then also being mindful of saying, where do those stem from? Is it that they value capitalism? Is it that they value meritocracy? Because that comes from the white supremacy ideology. So even that conversation still goes back to what's the root cause. And we're at a point right now that I think the only real, for me personally, like me mothering, the only good thing that came out of this administration is that I could use Trump as code word for racism, right? Because right now we're in India, we travel through the Coachella Valley, and when we go to Palm Springs, Palm Desert, or lo que sea, there's some white old folk that look at my kids like, what are you doing here? Right?
The red hatters.
My girls look back at them and they say, oh, there's another Trump, mama. There's another Trump. So ellas mismas deciden su lenguaje to protect themselves. And so that's really what we're trying to get to. It's like, how can we move forward? Yeah. Knowing that
I think
is everywhere.
I really am glad that you said that, Marta, because, you know, growing up, you know, I grew up in a predominantly Latino community, really Mexicano. And well, actually, that's not true. It was Mexican and Cuban. So, you know, that was really kind of where I grew up, and there wasn't really words for us to use to say white supremacy or to say racism. It was more of a feeling that we walked around with, like, you know, I remember going to Disneyland. It sounds so silly, right? But when my cousins would come from Mexico, it was a big deal for us to go to Disneyland, right? We didn't go all the time, you know, and back then it was, I think, more affordable than it is now, but still we would go. And I remember having this feeling of like, oh my God, they're looking at us differently, because I iba toda la chicanada, all the kids, rowdy ass Mexicans, you know, that we were, and we still are. But, you know, the feeling of like being seen in a particular way, being looked at negatively, being looked at down, like it was definitely a word. It was a feeling. And I think that that feeling in many ways has evolved over the years, but it's still very much there. You know what I mean? And like, I'm grown, I'm an adult, you know, but I still feel it sometimes, and I can hold my own, like in the hood and in the boardroom. So like I am straight, but like it's still very much there. And I think it's something that I'm glad that the kids actually have some words now to use to identify, because I think so many of us have internalized a lot of that, and even like how we move in the world, we internalize that, you know, and I think it's an important opportunity for us to like, tell our kids, teach ourselves as the women and the healers in our homes, the healers in our communities and our families, that it's important for us to say that, to admit that that's there, because then we can step up, you know, and to quote me Getsley, we can stunt on them. You know?
Yeah. So
But
much to do.
It's a different experience for sure.
Yeah, one of the things I'm thinking about a lot, especially because I know of the work of, you know, Alma and many of you, La Comadre, is like, I feel like, you know, and we're already getting into our, like, you know, we'll celebrate for a day, pero ya estamos listas, like, órale, what else do we got to do?
Right.
That's how we roll. It's like, it's always about what could we do to be, you know, fixing things or getting things done. And so my mind's already there in terms of, like, you know, I think we're going into, like, you know, what does it mean for, like, the Latino, like, we're going to have to do work in all these spaces in transforming our public education system so that we're investing more and holding institutions accountable to make sure that we're teaching critical thinking in our school system, that we have ethnic studies. I mean, that just got vetoed by the governor. So how do we change kind of the public education system to make sure that, because, you know, it's mostly our brown kids that are in the public schools that are getting, you know, that critical race theory, right? That ethnic studies, and we're changing and holding that institution accountable of the public school system. And then there's the role of community organizations. And at least for me, in my own, you know, concientización and just evolution as a leader, it's been through community organizations that my conciencia developed, my political consciousness, and my work. And so there's, like, the continued investment in creating and leading organizations that are for our people, by our people, to create the spaces to have those, you know, those robust, you know, McKessie says, courageous conversation, uncomfortable conversations, you know, about racism, about our own internalized oppression and our own anti-Blackness and all these other things that play out in our own community. So then we do the work in that, and then we got to do the work in our own familias, you know, so it's almost like donde quiera, we got to be figuring out, and I will say, I mean, that's how we roll. This is the kind of women that are here. And then at the same time, it's like, you know, we got to just keep on going, pero también support each other so we don't burn out.
Girl, I was about to say, because I'm tired.
Right?
I'm tired. I realized, can I just say, you know, and this week was just a really awful week for me personally. A very dear friend of mine passed away. And I have definitely been grieving. So I was, like, checked out, you know, as soon as I found out on Monday. And, but, you know, on Saturday was the first time I was on social media after not being on social media for a while. And I realized, fucking hey, like, I am traumatized. Like, neta, I feel traumatized by the chingazos that have been coming from Washington, D.C. And then also, like, the chingazos that have been coming from everywhere else for so long. And it was like, you know, and Norma, like, I mean, like, all my love and praise to you, because you have been on the front lines, and y'all, you know, I've been fortunate to see some of Norma's work close up for many years. And she's been literally on the border when the kids were being separated. She was the first one out there, and with her coalition of other groups and leaders, but she was leading a lot of that work. So I can imagine the trauma that she felt, you know, leading that work, seeing kids who look like us separated from their families, seeing mothers, you know, the work that that Norma has led specifically with the veterans who were deported. Like, Norma has been doing a lot of this work behind the scenes, and I feel like if I'm traumatized, I know a lot of our people are traumatized too, you know, and my level of trauma equate what Norma is seeing because of the stuff that she does in her professional life. But shit, like I feel traumatized. I'm like, we need like a collective limpia. Can we get some? Can we
Yes,
get
we
some
do.
copal, like some healing shit? We need something because
Right.
I do think we've got, we have to warrior up. Like that's who we are. That's how we roll for our people. That's how we roll for our families. Like, and not all of us are leaders in the community, but we're leaders in our homes and for our families, just real talk. Like we're the ones that get the calls. We're the ones who have to, help wherever we can, and that we're blessed to be able to help however we can. But it's tiring. And it's also a moment of like opportunity. Like how do we take care of ourselves? Especially when you're in the pleito all the time, either in the pleito with your family, right, Letty? In the pleito on social media, in the pleito with administrators, like I know Marta is, calling things out in systems that aren't trying to make us visible. In the pleito, that Miguetzli gets involved with because she's a student leader. It's a lot, and it's very taxing. And I think because I had this very dear friend of mine pass, she's a year older than me. It for me, it's also like how do we take care of ourselves so that we can be healthy and we can be here another day outside of what is happening politically, so we don't internalize all of that funk. Like I know I've internalized the shit, like just honestly, like I have internalized it. But I want us to be healthy so we can be here for the long haul,
Well, one, the fact that you named it and owned it, I mean, that and your vulnerability to share with us what you've been going through recently, and then this is broadcasted to social media. I think that itself is a huge step, right?
Yeah.
And I think like this Thursday, I'm talking on parenting while healing, the role of parents of color. Because like I'm a mother, and every single week we're bombarded with some shit, just like, holy, déjame, let me just recover from what happened last week.
Right?
Yeah.
Like every single week. And I'm honest with the parents that come to these sessions and say, hey, how are we feeling? Because I don't even know how the hell I'm feeling right now, but I'm gonna be honest with you and let's keep it going, right? But I think you're absolutely right in terms of let's honor, let's celebrate, but also how do we hone into our footing? Like how do we ground ourselves? Because every day, it's like we're here, right? And I think that the whole point is reminding ourselves of what is our intent. Our intentionality is also very important, so we don't waste our energy con tarugadas,
Yeah.
And the reality that we now have to contend with the fact that we know without a doubt that there are at least 70 million motherfuckers on this earth in this country that don't give a shit about the 666 kids that are still not with their parents.
Yeah.
So I totally applaud you, Norma, for doing the work that you do on the border and in San Diego and in all of your work. And it bothers me that I have family members that are part of that ignorant class of people that, oh well, I'm pro-life and so is he. Motherfucker is not pro-life. Like, come on. Like, and but what am I gonna do? Tell my mom that? It's like, I mean, I'll tell anybody else that, but I'm just like, I don't even talk to her because I don't even want to tell her how fucking stupid she is.
The truth is that this is the time to have real and direct and honest conversations, because otherwise that shit lingers.
Alma knows my mom.
I love her mom.
I've had some really tough love conversations with my own parents, not about politicas, but just because under this pandemic, on top of everything else, it's our time to really shift our thinking about what is it, how do we want to live our life? Through chat. Like, how do I want, the reason I'm in India is because my younger brother passed away in July, right? He was 3 years younger than I. That's a fucking reality check. Right? I lost my younger brother and this pandemic is going on. I'm, hustling as a single mom. How do I want to live my life? So if I'm going to have a really tough love conversation with my parents, guess what? You know what? There's a reality of us being able to be okay reparenting our parents so that I could be a better parent. And part of that is telling my damn truth. So if I'm gonna make my mama uncomfortable, I'm gonna make her uncomfortable and then apologize for it, but I'm gonna fucking let it be. And that's okay. That's part of my healing. That's part of my healing so that I could mother my next generation that could be the president of the United States. Because Solinés, trucha, she named all these Trump supporters out here. Ya les dio el apodo. They're Jeffries. El pinche Jeffrey was looking at me crazy.
Jeffrey.
And that's about me as a Chicana. This is my Chicana mothering. Letting them use whatever language they can. And if I'm going to have something holding me back, like the relationship with your mother, that's going to hold you back. And so maybe just a different generation. But I think that going back to, connected to Alma's point, how do we heal?
Yeah.
Like, how can we heal, especially right now? Right? And if we don't take the time to shift even our own persona, like, how can I redefine who I am as a persona? I mean, all this fucking time, I was just like, what was I doing? Right?
Yeah, for me, it's just been easier to just stay away from them. And they live in Kansas, so that's kind of easy to do. We were going to talk. You guys were going to spill the tea about Eva Longoria.
Oh,
What happened with that?
I was like,
Yeah, what was up with that? I'll be honest, because I actually was out of town this weekend, and so it was until I think later, and I started getting texts, and then I went on social media, and I was trying to follow along, and the first thing I thought was like, WTF, que chingados dijo, like, how'd she F it up? And so I kind of caught up on it a little bit, but I'll be honest, I didn't. But to me, it's just like, damn, that's the last freaking thing we do.
so can we talk about
this
what
point.
happened? So
Yeah.
somebody say,
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
somebody else explain
and
it,
I only knew about it because my little girl over here texted me from the next bedroom to tell me in the morning. So I woke up to it. I was asleep when it happened. So
we can see, break it down.
Break it down.
So
Synopsis.
I didn't see the segment. She did an interview. I think it was on MSNBC, CNN, one of these networks, and essentially made some comments that got really misinterpreted. And I think her intentions were well. I didn't see the interview, and I don't even know exactly what she said. But I just, from what I understood from all the Twitter beef and all the people that were coming for her, essentially she was trying to compare Latino men and Latina women, and yeah, basically it just went crazy. And so I just saw just kind of after, but I just think there's a lot to discuss.
Marta, you saw it?
Yeah, I saw parts of her trying to apologize for how it was misinterpreted. So I think that the main point, and I'll say it and then I'm going to problematize it. So the main point was essentially they were just getting her, because let's admit it, Eva Longoria, she has a platform, right? And so whatever Latino related issue, well, let's go. She's one of a handful of folks that they're going to go and interview. So she has a platform. She's used, anyways, the point is that they were asking her about commenting, or she made a comment regarding Black women organizing. And rightly so, they have been organizing for not these last 4 years, way before that, right? So it's been a moment.
Yes.
And so so she was contextualizing, really asking for, let's pay attention. Let's also put the attention on Latinas, Chicanas, brown women also organizing. But the way it came out, it was like sort of like, let's make sure, kind of putting us on this kind of a, like we call it the oppression, the Olympics, right? Who's oppressed over who and who's doing it better. And so that was what was taken, really offline. And then she tried to apologize for it like more than one time. So it's kind of like that Gina Rodriguez kind of situation.
So I'm reading. I want to make sure that we're clear about what she said. And we're reading, and I'm reading it. What she said is that Latinas were the real heroines of this election. So kind of minimizing the work of other Black women. And let's not forget, in Michigan, the work that our friend Linda Sarsauer did with the Muslim community out there, and other communities, and the Navajo Nation in Arizona that flipped Arizona. So, I mean, everybody put in.
Right. No, absolutely. So I think
So I think it was taken like she was trying to minimize.
to some
This
extent,
is what I'm reading.
to some
Yeah.
extent. And so I think part of the challenge I had with this whole thing, right, is that even with the victory speeches, I had a problem with, because there was a level of this black-white binary narrative that has existed historically, right? When they talk about folks of color, it's always this black-white binary. And for those of us who are not in that binary, we kind of are marginalized. We still live in the margin. And so I think the problem I had with this whole attention to Eva Longoria is that we're not problematizing it enough. Because just having this black-white binary, you're not taking into account, the blackness in our own community, right? Afro-Latinos, like it's not black and white anymore, folk. And so I think that's really the kind of connected to the what's next, what are the tactics? And I think part of the tactic is let's not fall victims to this black-white binary. It's so much more nuanced. And so I think when we talk about moving forward and having hope with this administration, but still hold them accountable, I think I'm hopeful of holding this administration accountable, because I'm hopeful that there's going to be folks in that team that can actually hear us and actually listen to us. I think that's really the hope. So it goes back connected to the Eva Longoria. It's like, we can't keep shit simplistic anymore. It's not that easy. It's not this black, white, y ahí déjalo. No. Yeah. It's very complex. It's very nuanced. We're not going to tolerate us being marginalized anymore, right? We're going to speak to it. And even the fact that they were trying to sort of put this hierarchy of blackness and Latinos, or, we can't entertain that. We can't entertain that anymore, because it goes back to a conversation, it goes back to the 1993 conversation between Chicana feminist Betty Martinez and Angela Davis, having this conversation that as women of color, we have been the backbone, all women of color, women, period, matriarchs. We've been the backbone of our communities thriving. And so that's why they said, we shouldn't fall victims of this oppression Olympics. Like, ¿quién está fregada más? No, let's not entertain that.
Estamos todas fregadas.
Yeah, so much of that, I feel like, and there's this generational thing where, I do feel, like younger folks, it's like all on Twitter and whatever. I mean, I can't even keep up with it. But at the same time, in terms of moving forward, I really think that us as Chicanas, as Latinas, it's like, how are we in intentional relationship with sisters, right? With Black women, with other women of color, and how are we building power together? And how are we in intentional relationship so that we're plotting and having each other's back? Because to me, it comes down to that. Because, a tweet, a statement, it could get reinterpreted. But at the end of the day, there's a battle going on in San Diego right now where, there's a Black woman who hopefully will be the next council president. And there's already all these movidas happening. And at the end of the day, where are we going to be? And how are we going to pull together to make sure we get that done? Because she is the best leader for the council presidency. And so I think it then comes down to the hard work of intentional relationships that are not transactional, that are solid and real, and that we're invested in each other's power and in each other's leadership. And that's the work that we all have to do in whatever spaces we're in.
Yeah. This what you said is just so on point. I think not all of us have been blessed by having friendships that are interracial friendships because of how we grew up. I mean, just real talk, right? Like some people just grew up in predominantly raza neighborhoods, never met somebody who was Black. Maybe when they went out of, when they grew up and they went to either work, that's maybe when they met somebody Black, or when they went to college, that might have been when, they met somebody Black. And because we live in segregated neighborhoods, we often don't have those relationships, right? And I think, and I've done a lot of thinking of this and work on this over the years. And I think, for people who don't speak English, for raza women who don't speak English, it's a language barrier when Black folks only speak English, right? That's not to say that there's not Black people who are bilingual. We know several who are. I know several who are, I should say. But the reality is that the majority are not. And so the language barrier is very real. But I think for those of us who are bilingual and can speak, we do need to be intentional about the how do we uplift our communities, especially because like in this space where Kamala got elected, and it's a big freaking deal that she got elected. And the reality is that there's going to be other people questioning, well, why not a Latina? Why not one of us? Now there's this conversation with the U.S. Senate because her race, she was the U.S. Senator representing the state of California, and now she's going to be the vice president. So now people are saying it's our turn to have a Latina be representing the state of California, because representation matters. But, there's this whole other conversation of like, how do we make sure that we stay visible and that we stay vocal? Because in this historic conversation, we're like, raza es cero a la izquierda. We're like, raza is not even in the conversation. Latinos aren't in the conversation. So how do we make sure that our Black allies are thinking and helping Latinos at the same time that our white allies are thinking about and helping Latinos make sure we're at the table? And so that we can represent ourselves, because a lot of these power structures are making decisions when raza is not at the table. And yes, there might be window dressing. They might have one or two, but like they're not really making decisions of power. And I think it's important that we are honest about these things. And we've had some of these conversations in private before, but I'm the first one to ask my white friends and my Black friends to make sure that we're not invisible. And those are uncomfortable conversations. But I'm like, I'm looking at you when you're at the table to make sure that one of us is at the table representing our kids. But there are difficult conversations to have. And I think we need to talk about it more so that we can say it's okay to ask, take care of my people too. In California, make sure that raza is represented at the highest levels. And I'm looking at Governor Newsom to see what he's going to do on this front. Because I do think it's important that we have a Latino senator from California. I do think that's important.
I'll say that I prefer a Latina senator.
Girl, me too.
Because, we're going to replace one woman, and I'll say it right here, and I'm just going to keep it real. But I do think that women, Latinas son más chingonas in positions of power. They work harder. Not everyone is as progressive as I'd like them to be, but just my own experience, even with electeds, that the women electeds tend to work a lot harder. So I'm a big supporter of a Latina to replace, like a Latina for U.S. Senate.
Yes, I love that too. Wait, can I just say something real quick? One of the major reasons why I have respected Kamala when she was senator, even though she's still officially a senator, but why, as Senator Kamala Harris, why I respected her so much was because she was an incredibly fierce advocate for immigrants and for Latinos. And she was unapologetic about that. She was leading on DACA. She was leading on the DREAM Act, on the separation. She led for real on a lot of very important immigrant issues. And that's one of the reasons why I'm a fan, right? But I also think that we need someone who's going to be fiercely as hardcore as she was on the immigration issue. And I really think that is something that we need to talk about so that those expectations are set. Because I agree. I actually want to make sure that women are continued represented in that way. We already have enough dudes there. But I definitely want our issue of strong immigrant advocacy at the table.
So who would you be suggesting if you
Norma,
could.
I want to hear your thoughts. Marta, what do you think? McGetsley.
Who would run or who should be?
To be appointed, because you know the governor. That was the other thing. I'm sorry. The detail is that the governor has to appoint somebody
Yeah.
since Kamala got elected.
Yeah.
So who should pick?
I'll nominate myself. Shit.
Hey. We've been talking about trying to get Miss Marta to run.
Send Marta.
We've
Send
been
Marta.
talking about this for some time, and yeah, no,
Yeah.
I would not be opposed to that.
I would not be opposed to that. I've been saying I can't be president because I wasn't born here, nací en Mexico. So I've always had my eye on governorship or a chancellor. We need to be able to take it on. So absolutely, I would not ever be opposed to something like that. But yeah, I'm not. You know, at this point, it's really someone who's going to be able to speak, because you know after after the murder of George Floyd and the revolutionary just uplift that we all experience of like let's do this now. We've been doing it, but now let's really do it in a different level. I want somebody who's going to be able to call the system for what it is. Like have the terminology to really say, we're going to change the system. We're talking about protocol. We're talking about procedures. We're talking about funding formula. You know, we're not going to cut it anymore. You know, I've been talking to a lot of nonprofit organizations about, it goes back to, tell me what your overhead percentage, because that's what you're retaining and you're not giving in our communities, right? It's as minor as that may seem, it's really exaggerating how much we're not giving to our communities. Y que según son para la comunidad, but let me look at your funding formula, right? That follow the money. So I really want somebody who's going to be comfortable calling every single aspect of that position to ensure that there's going to be some systemic changes. And, you know, because we saw it in an uprise, like all the counties are now hiring like the director of diversity and equity, la fregada. But who are you going to hire? Who are you really going to hire to make those changes, right? Because if you're just going to hire your cousin, I mean, you know, and I've been applying to some of these positions because it's really going to be contingent on who you hire to really make some real changes. Because it's about process. It's about protocol.
Absolutely.
Going back to your hiring description of the job, who's your HR? Simple as that, right? Are they really following protocol? Because I can tell you some folks aren't. And so I think that's really who's going to be there. It's got to be that system hard hitter, absolutely fierce, absolutely a woman, hopefully someone unapologetically, someone who's a mother. Mothering brings such a different perspective in how we care for our children, and not just my children, everyone's children. Right? Yeah. So yeah, I don't have anyone in mind that I would say that's who I would think about, but I agree. I certainly want somebody that represents our community.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say that, you know, it's California, and given what's happening in other parts of like the Senate, the fact that the Senate might not completely flip depending on what happens in Georgia, whoever the governor appoints, which, you know, we're talking about preferably a Latino or Latina, you know, I'll be honest, I actually thought Barbara Lee would be great. You know, Karen Bass, these are Black women who have been unapologetically down.
Yeah.
For Latinos. And so for me, I'm looking for a badass woman of color that is gonna literally be fierce and represent and do the work. Because if you look at, you know, the national government, right? Congress, all, you know, McConnell, they're gonna have to deal with Mitch McConnell. Like I do not, if I had the power to choose, I would not want to appoint someone that's been like a career politician. And I'll tell you, you know, some of our Latino leaders, it's just like, it's the good old boy network of the Latino political, you know, machine. And many of them are just comfortable there. Are they really progressive? Are they really bold? Are they gonna really fight for our communities? And I think that women are more positioned to do that. And they're more likely to, because many of them, if they're mothers, I agree with Marta, you know, a mother. Someone that is going to really have that fire in the belly to go to Washington and fight for California and fight for our community.
Yeah. And we will have to be strategic about it, because if we pluck people from Congress, then we could lose our majority and our leverage there. So we do have to be strategic. There really is a handful of I believe it should be a woman. I believe it should be a Latina. but we'll see what happens.
But I do think, yes, I think it should be a Latina. I think gender is important. Gender representation is important. I think racial representation is important. And I think that, part of the problem is that we don't have a bench of well-experienced Latinas looking at these statewide positions. We have these dudes who come in and they're able to raise money. They have these conectes, they're able then to hire their friends who then help them, stay elected. And unfortunately, there's not like a base of a lot of women who have been, frankly, groomed.
Yeah, I'm hearing the same names over and over. Hilda Solis,
Yeah. But I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to say something, and I haven't talked to her about this, but I will say this because I think she's fierce as hell. And I don't know if she's watching, but somebody who what I 100% think would be ready, because she's been in the trenches for several years. She's young and she's incredibly smart and incredibly knowledgeable about government and how it functions, but she's also not naive of how to move things along, is a former city councilwoman of Santa Ana. Her name is Michelle Martinez. And Michelle Martinez is fierce AF, to quote me Gensley, and is someone who could be there for the long term, but also knows how to win elections. So she could win. She knows how to raise money. She knows how cities work, but she knows how to budgets work.
I could fuck with that. I really could.
And that she would be, and she was the president of NALEO, the National Association of Latino Elected and Appointed Officials. Michelle has unapologetically talked about the importance of representation. She has an amazing story of coming up from real poverty, from real challenges. And she's an amazing leader. And she's on the governor appointed her to the statewide transportation authority. I think I might mess up the name. But she's amazing. She's been part of SCAG, the Southern California Association of Governments. And I think that she would be someone long-term who could absolutely win the Senate seat again. And we should be thinking about Michelle as someone who should be appointed as a U.S. Senator. And I love the idea.
Write it up, Alma. We'll put La Comadre's name on it and send it to the governor.
Well, there's already all sorts of op-eds. There's already a lot of moves with names.
Yep.
And remember, Feinstein, and I know that
we don't have representation with her.
She's got to go. So I'm hoping that in a couple of years, we have two badass women of color, U.S. senators representing California, a black woman and a brown woman holding it down.
Yeah. I love that idea too. Mm-hmm. And I love Karen Bass.
We just spoke it into the universe, so it's going to happen.
Yeah,
guys, this has been a great conversation. There's a lot still happening. I imagine that we're going to come on here and have some more of these conversations because we don't know what's going to happen right now. This fool is challenging everything, and there's all kinds of like crazy shit happening with this man. So there's still a lot that's going to happen, and we're going to come back and we're going to keep talking about this, and we're going to have these conversations as long as we need to. But everyone, please just stay informed. Stay informed. And if you want information, reach out to us at La Comadre. We're always happy to have conversations on whatever you want to talk about. But in the meantime, let's wait and see what's going to happen and where these challenges are going to end up. So thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you all.
Good night. Appreciate you. Thank you, Mackenzie, for joining us.
Of course.
Can we just say that I love that we are standing in our grace as incredible women. And I really want to celebrate what an incredible accomplishment this is happening. Like one of us is going to be a heartbeat away from the presidency. And I want to celebrate that. Like, I just really am so happy about that. Like, for real. Like, we deserve that. And I think all of our moms got to see, like, they got to see this, and how wonderful that they got to see it, and that our children are going to be able to see that. So I just really want to celebrate that, and celebrate who we are as women too. Just,
yeah.
I love y'all.
Que viva la mujer.
Yes, que viva.
Buenas noches. See you all later.
Buenas noches, comadres. Thank you.
Thank you.
Celebrate y luego para adelante. There's still, the work continues.
Absolutely. Adios.